Today on the Summoning Circle, we'll go over the current state of the meta, the Gwent Slam qualifier results, and more. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Summoning Circle podcast. My name is Vanitas, and I'm your host. First, we'll talk about the meta. There's 3 decks dominating right now, and 2 decks that are lagging way behind. I went through the top 500 players on the pro ladder, and looked at how the different factions are performing for them. To see which factions are most consistent for the top players, I looked at how many players took each faction above 1400 MMR and 1300 MMR. First up is Scoia'tael, with the new Spellatail decks. 7 players have reached 1400 MMR, and 61 have reached 1300. This Spellatail deck is currently absolutely taking over the meta. On the pro ladder, it can seem like it's the only deck anyone is playing right now. Head over to gwentdb.com and take a look at this deck. It has the double gold weather and Marigold's Hailstorm kit, plus a lot of deck thinning that makes this deck extremely consistent. It's the main reason why it's taken so many players, the most of any faction, over 1400 MMR for their faction. Next up, Northern Realms. Since the hotfix, Northern Realms has consistently been a powerhouse in the current ladder, and currently, full test hybrid decks with both machines and armor are the most popular. There are currently 6 players with at least 1400 MMR, and 116, the most of any faction, with over 1300 MMR. Last up is Monsters, with 3 players over 1400 MMR and 73 over 1300. Monsters was a faction, up until recently, that was being considered one of the worst of the current patch. That is, until Dagon came back from the dead and showed his persistent power in this hybrid deck. There are 2 factions that are lagging far behind. Whereas we had 7 players with over 1400 MMR with Scoia'tael, and 116 players with over 1300 MMR for Northern Realms, Skellige, the first of the abandoned factions, is down at 0 players that have reached 1400 MMR and just 13 that have reached 1300 MMR. Skellige right now is lacking any decks that have the consistency or tempo to keep up with the other meta decks, and has thus fallen this far behind. And lastly, Nilfgaard, in a very similar situation to Skellige, with 0 players reaching 1400 MMR and just 16 reaching 1300. Nilfgaard is personally my favorite faction, and the John Calvate spy decks seem pretty good on the surface, but not a single player has been able to take the faction to 1400 points yet. And now, from news from the scene. Qualifiers for Life Coach's Gwent Slam tournament are all finished, and the qualifying list is in. The 8 players taking part in the tournament are the following. Game King, who is the runner-up at the Gwent Together tournament, gets a spot because the winner of the tournament, Mega Mogwai, is an official CDPR caster and thus not eligible for official tournaments. Game King has been consistently near the top of the ladder and is a well-known name from the competitive Hearthstone scene. Next up, Freddy Babes, consistently one of the strongest players in the ladder. He qualified during the first Gwent Slam Open qualifier. Next up, Panda, similarly to Freddy Babes, a top ladder player, and the winner of the second Open qualifier. Our 4th player is Shaggy Nuts. Up until he won the Open portion of the Gwent Open number 1, he was known to nobody, but after he went on to win the whole thing, he made quite a name for himself with his fantastic play, and is now considered one of the top players in the game. 5th on the list is Adzikov, another player familiar with anyone who's spent any amount of time looking at the top of the ladder. At the time of recording, Adzikov is number 1 on the ladder, and that's precisely how he qualified for this spot. And lastly, the 3 invitees. First up, Swim, one of the most popular Gwent streamers and YouTubers. He's responsible for making many decks popular. Next up, Tides of Time, the 2nd invitee. He's an extremely well-known Hearthstone player, competing in tournaments since the beginning, and has been playing Gwent for a few months now. The 3rd invitee is Melee Man, a popular Russian streamer and former Hearthstone player. Gwent Slam takes place this weekend, starting on the 23rd, and the quality of this group of players is incredibly high, so be sure to check it out. And that's all for today. Subscribe to the Summoning Circle on iTunes and wherever else podcasts are played. If you have any feedback or ideas for what you'd like to hear on future episodes, get in touch. vanitas.cabal@gmail.com. You can also find the Summoning Circle on Twitter @the Summoning Circle.